So yes, maybe if we can just go around and introduce ourselves for those who don't know each other, and say who you are and what your interest is of being here. So we don't work in any clockwise system here. So I'll just work on my screen. So Noel, would you like to start?
Hi there. Hi. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? My name's Noel Bridgman. I'm the director of Bridgman Arts Events. I'm a freelance artist and musician and programmer, and I work quite often in carnivals and street performance and street art and community engagement. I pretty much, my work is suspended at the moment, as you can imagine, because I do involves working with large numbers of people, but there are some plans. But I'm not anticipating, although I have contracted work for next year and be working towards that, I'm very mindful of the fact that things may be different. So at the moment, my focus, particularly with this meeting too, is about the bigger picture of building back and less about how I specifically tackle each event as it comes up. Because I do think that we are going to be in a situation where we have to think very, very differently about the whole structure of public engagement and how these companies that work in public engagement can actually make money and survive. So I don't think that's a conclusion that's going to get very far in the next few months, because I think there's a bigger picture which is going to define many of our parameters. So that's my general perspective.
Very good. Fionnuala, I think you're next.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Fionnuala Doherty. I'm a freelance actor, a physical performer, movement artist, a singer, a musician, a composer, and a pyrotechnician. And despite having all of those job titles, I've had absolutely no work. But it is just starting to drift in again. So I've got 3 very varied projects coming up, which is great to start to test the ground for what's going to be working in public spaces again. And I'm here mainly because there's a piece that I have in mind that I would like to start devising and working on, and I'm just kind of trying to pick up some tips from like-minded people really about how to proceed. That's it.
Fantastic. Excellent. Jackie.
Hi. Hi everyone, I'm really pleased to be here today because I've got a programme in the NHS called Animating Public Spaces. So it's programming live arts, and we've been on hold since March, and I'm really interested in how we can bring live arts to hospital campuses safely, but also at this point understand that hospitals themselves want to keep people away as much as possible, and at the moment we're way down the pecking order, the arts are, for risk assessments. So home is where health is at the moment, and in communities. So I'm just really interested to hear what people have to say, how people are thinking, and hopefully that will inform my thinking. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Jane. Karen. Can you use the mic?
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. So I'm Karen Poley, I'm losing my voice a bit. So creative producer, artistic director of the Bicycle Ballet Company. So we had 2 shows touring, one of which I don't think is going to happen until there's some kind of vaccine, because there's a lot of costume and loads of kind of close personal work and stuff. And the other one, which is really simple, which was made on a shoestring and is just touring after like 7 years or something, which I think is going to go forever. And then the other project that I do is it's called the Living Coast Undersea Experience. So I live in a biosphere region, and just off the coast is a marine conservation zone. So I wanted to kind of show people what it was. So it's a virtual reality piece, giving people the opportunity to explore and kind of understand the what's there really, and kind of develop some pro-conservation behaviours, is the technical term. again, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again. So I guess I'm just kind of, I don't know, kind of interested to meet people and see what other people think. I'm kind of looking, I've got a couple of ideas for how to pivot, which is another technical term I've learned recently. And yeah, see what we can do. But I don't really think that I'm going to be working this year, to be honest. But anyway.
Jane, shall we try again?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
You are.
I work for Creative Scotland. I'm physical performance specialist, so circus, outdoor, physical theatre. I'm here as much to listen as opposed to necessarily, I mean, I'll contribute when I have something to do so, but I'm just more interested to hear what current thinking is externally.
Excellent. Lorenzo.
Hi, I'm Lorenzo Mele. I am the executive producer of Merchant City Festival here in Glasgow. We obviously couldn't go ahead with the festival in its usual form this year. However, we did manage to do an online day, which part of that was supporting the moving out, as well as a whole program from Surge. And thanks to the City Council agreeing to still giving us part of the grant they give us, and also thanks to Creative Scotland allowing us to carry the grant that we were going to have to use this year into next year. We are doing some projects sort of through the autumn. One of them is with Noel, actually, around developing, working with communities on carnival content for next year, but going through a whole process with him and also with Aerial Edge. So, and also there are other artists that we are hoping to work with that we would have been part of this year's festival, and we're looking at ways of working with them through the autumn. Now, the default for all of that would be online stuff, but actually we're starting to think about how do we actually do some of that in person on the streets or with people in a live context, albeit with all the restrictions that whatever restrictions we might have to deal with. So I suppose I wanted to come to this just to hear people's thinking, because obviously with all these restrictions and these guidelines, artists are great at finding the creative responses and the ways to make those things, rather than see them as restrictions, see them as interesting stimuli. So I suppose it's just finding out how we can work within those constrictions and actually still make it an exciting experience for everyone. So yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen. I worked with Neil for many, many years doing outdoor arts administration and production, but in recent years I've been specialising in prop making. My background is kind of visual arts and stop motion animation, so kind of going more towards that sort of thing now. Aiming to work with theatre and film and TV, but not kind of established yet, but was starting to, and then COVID came along and then everything disappeared. So just hoping to see what's potential in the coming months and years. That's me.
So, Angie?
Hi there, I'm Angie Dye and I'm the artistic director of Mischief Le Bar, and we make interactive street theatre, walkabout, other types of performance, but it's always interactive with the public, mostly outdoors. So in terms of where we are now, I'm working on a project, making a new show, but obviously it's really changing how it can be made. It's very interactive in terms of people touching things and moving things. So I'm just really having to rethink how that can still be done. I mean, I see that it still can be done, but it's how do you make something that isn't really clunky, that you know, it's ticking all the boxes in terms of socially distancing, trying to tell the story, being interactive, etc. Is it actually going to be any good, or is it, you know? And how do you make this thing that's going to work now, or probably early spring really, that's going to work then, but then maybe in another year's time it's going to be also, you know, it's still got to be properly interactive. So I'm just trying to sort of work with that. I've also just had a gig that was in the 1st and 2nd of September postponed. So yeah, I'm feeling a bit sort of, well, looking at the news generally, you're like, I can see, I think we were all really optimistic about, yeah, we can get back out there, yeah, we can do this, especially being outdoors. But I don't know, feeling a bit more wary or pessimistic, I suppose, at the moment, and wondering, and especially see with the Aberdeen thing, but things happening in Spain, etc. It's like, oh, have we got a little bit overexcited? That's what I'm wondering. So that's, yeah.
Mel.
Hi everyone, I'm Mel. I'm a physical theatre practitioner with Surge and also a freelance artist, theatre maker, working indoors and outdoors. During lockdown, I've done quite a lot of work online with Surge and also my freelance practice. And now I'm at the start of a process as a director, but also as a mentor for creating outdoor work in a socially distanced way. So I'm working with a youth theatre to create a couple of new walkabout acts at the moment, starting very, very soon. So question marks about that. And also I'm mentoring some artists through the Surge Bursary programme who are creating new pieces of work that hopefully will be performed soonish. So yeah, I'm kind of here to chat with other people that might be starting processes in a new way and trying to create something that is, you know, artistically fulfilling for both, you know, for everyone involved, but also is taking everything into consideration. So yes, very new times.
Thank you. And finally, Neil.
Hello, I'm Neil Butler. This meeting is partly my fault. My company UZ was, and previously UZ Events, been involved in putting on outdoor arts for many years, and it closed in March. We often talk about it being art in public space, so that is a term that was kind of coined through the In Situ Network, which is an international network of festival producers working outdoors. And so it has a capacity as a term to sort of really include every form of work that takes place outside conventional venues. And what we're talking about now, the first interest for me was to find a way of generating conversations about how we might go forward. This is part of it, and I've set up a website called Wrap the World, which is essentially going to be a place where artists and producers can promote and develop projects as we go into the future that explore innovative and experiments in art and public space. So if you're all happy with it, I'm going to take this, the video of this conversation, it'll go on to Wrap the World, and join the video of the Moving Out conference. And my sort of creative contribution to this discussion really is based around the idea of an artist in every place. And as we think about, it's really interesting that Merchant City Festival and many other festivals have, one of the ways they've dealt with the situation is to spread work, is to say, well, okay, we'll extend our programs through the year and find ways of addressing an audience rather than gathering very large audiences together, to spread the work and to develop the audiences perhaps in a different way. And I'm really interested in the idea of the work we do going into smaller groups, smaller communities, and extending it so there really is an artist in every place. So that's my style of the conversation.
And I suppose it's fascinating, just even with the 12 of us in the room, how different our experience has been in terms of what we can do and what has been cancelled. But also, I suppose the complexities of what we do are so, the detail is so complicated. But I think there were sort of two strands there, and I suppose for the first bit, there were several people talked about how do we create work that isn't destroyed by the compromise? Sort of, they put it slightly more positively, but there's that sense of, and we were meant to do a restaging of our version of Dracula up here, and even though it's an outdoor show, even though in lots of ways it's socially distanced, how can Dracula bite someone from 6 feet away? And it feels like to reinvent the whole story so you're going to have long socially distanced vampirism just doesn't work. So, and I think some projects that were in our heads beforehand are probably similar, that we just have to accept that until the world turns again, they're out the way. But I suppose, yeah, how do we deal with that compromise? How do we create a new validity so that when you're watching the work, you're not watching a socially distanced work. You're watching something that is fascinating in itself, and it just happens to be done in a way that allows distance to be kept between performers and audience and everyone else. And I think this is going, sort of, Angie, you talking about doing a work that you hope is going to have a longer life, and I expect, and Mel, what you were talking about, there's that bit of how do we do it? And I think Neil's got some answers in terms of, we spread the work, we make it more local, we maybe don't rely on those kind of mass gatherings, but we also maybe don't rely on some of those fantastic but logistically really precise sort of international projects where I suppose the lockdown here is reminding us that actually we were meant to start rehearsing something on Monday, and now at least one of the performers won't be here until Thursday. So how do we recreate those processes to allow for a slower, gentler process that, yes, is much more spread out, I think, is the challenge. And yeah, so I suppose as people have come back to work, what are people finding interesting challenges, or kind of how are we dealing with some of these bits for people who have started thinking about reworking? Just unmute and go for it. Oh, Angie's on it.
Yeah, I think maybe more flexibility with working with performers and artists, because I think, yeah, this not being so rigid in timeframes, which suits me anyway. But just because I think that things will change, and I think perhaps we need to be more aware of that, and perhaps planning a year ahead is not the most ideal way to go. But how you actually do that, you need enough work to be coming in to often to be able to, not plan way ahead.
Yeah, we've had a conversation about kind of people getting sick, really, I suppose. So, our model is touring, and how do you do that if someone gets sick or something? So we've had this conversation where we kind of think that probably we'll have like two performers held with a kind of contingency, so that there's a, that kind of commit to trying to look after themselves if that's possible, in the run up to it. But yeah, at the moment, I don't know, that's a whole other thing, isn't it? That's more fees, that's more, yeah.
In this process that I'm going to be starting pretty soon, with the youth theatre in particular, we're going to be doing a mix of online and in-person rehearsals, but also the group is being split up into 2, potentially 3 groups. So I'll be doing the same rehearsal workshop 3 times, twice or 3 times over, with smaller groups, which is fine at the moment in my capacity at Surge, but that feels not very sustainable for projects going forward. At the moment, that feels like these are our options, and then when the performances happen, it will be, yes, potentially 1 walkabout act. This is all to be discovered still, but 1 walkabout act that's done with 3 small groups that aren't in the same place at the same time. So it sort of pops up in 3 different places. That's the thinking at the moment in my process.
Mel, how many people in one workshop are you thinking of?
That depends on the venue that we secure for rehearsals at the moment. I'm thinking the largest group will be 10. and that depends on whether we can get a space that we're thinking about that's really large and ventilated. And then if we can't get that space, it will be smaller groups, depending on the space.
And how many in work would you think of having?
Sorry, say that again.
In Surge, how many would you think of having in rehearsal at the moment or soon?
I don't. So at the moment, I'm not sure. I'm not thinking about the Surge space. I wasn't thinking about that one. And I'd have to. I don't. We've not really set an exact number on that yet. So I'd have to sort of speak to the rest of the Surge team to see where the thinking is on an exact number. Obviously, it's quite a big space. I imagine maybe 10 is okay. But I'm just plucking that number out of the air for now. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
And of course, I think to add to that, if we ever did get back into international work, but actually even Four Nations work, we may well find that we have to be flexible to each different place that we go to. So it may be that, so it's entirely possible to imagine a tour where you have completely different restrictions south of the border and north of the border. And possibly even south of the Central Belt and north of the Central Belt, depending on kind of these local measures. And I think, there's going to be something fascinating about that. And I think you're right that working in bubbles is clearly a way forward. Although I suppose your version does rely on you not being the super spreader yourself. Because at the moment, if you are the super spreader, then the entire project is down. And I suppose, which is it's not a criticism at all, because we're all in a sort of similar boat, but I suppose it becomes that sense of those traditional roles of a sort of a one person at the top process of creation. Is that always going to be possible? Sort of do we need to think about co-directors, sort of, or a team, or a different way of creating work? Because again, sort of not only does that one version have a real risk to it if you were the spreader, it also has a real risk if you were the one who had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And I think, sort of, I don't know how we create a new way of working, but it feels like we do need to have something where we need to explore models where individuals don't make or break a production. Where if the director disappears for 2 weeks, then the other directors or the movement director or somebody else does stuff. And if a couple of actors have to disappear, performers have to disappear for a couple of weeks, then actually the show carries on and maybe changes a bit. Or I think we are going to have to really embrace some of these, because not to embrace them will just lead to horrible, clunky solutions when shit hits the fan, I suppose.
There's one project that I was working on with Angie, actually, called Snowball Effect. We're talking of international work and how to manage that. And essentially, we developed it in one country, in Sri Lanka, and developed a format as to how it might then continue. And the snowball was that each place it went to, it lost some people and gained some people. And as it went to a different place, sometimes it was possible, there's a core that went with it, but they could also lose people from the core. So maybe the designer and the director went with it, but then they handed over to another designer and another director. But the essence of it as a project was that it's almost like a formula. It was some very strong ideas about what the content might be, and a way of working. And most of it was done online. A great deal of the preparation by necessity took place online. And we learned a lot. And it was things worked and things didn't work, and it is continuing. Another project that was trying to address this issue of how to work internationally without carrying lots of people with you was Dries Verhoeven, the Dutch artist, And we worked with him on a project in Sri Lanka, and he was very aware of air miles. He didn't want lots of traveling. There's 20 people in the cast. And the show traveled around Britain and the Netherlands and Germany. But essentially, the show took place in what then was 10 years ago was a video internet cafe, and the performance took place in Sri Lanka. So there were 20 performers online and 20 audience online. The point being was that was his vision. He knew what he wanted to achieve, and he knew the incredible constraints, the physical and traveling constraints, and he made his work to those constraints. And I think one of the great the great thing about our sector is resilience, because we're not used to making shows to the health and safety demands of a concert hall or a theatre or whatever. We're used to dealing with being flexible. And I think so when we went into the Moving Out Symposium, I really did feel that as a sector, it was one which had the most opportunity to come out quicker. I don't know if you all agree with that, but I guess that continues to be my feeling.
We're certainly coming out of it quicker. And it's been interesting seeing, what has been able to emerge. So I suppose, like you were saying, Karen, it's sometimes those really simple shows and those really simple formats that are the quickest to emerge. So what the Moniacas down in Cornwall or something is very much what was, sort of pulling things off the shelf. I wonder what people feel about, so I suppose we've all spent far more time on Zoom than we can possibly imagine. And, while it's a lifeline in lots of ways, I wonder whether people are finding it creatively exciting or whether you just desperately wish you could look someone in the eyes. Yeah, and are there strengths to Zoom, or is it just a horrible sort of bridging process at the moment? No.
Yeah, I mean, I must be quite rare then, because I've only had like 3 Zoom meetings in all these months. I'm not really familiar with this way of chatting, and most of what I do doesn't rely on this. But in my circumstances, I've never worked with a group. I work with hundreds of groups all the time for single events, but I've never worked with a group that doesn't already have many other purposes beyond the art form that I might be bringing to them. And for me, since lockdown started, I've been more concerned from a heartfelt point of view as to the sustainability of those groups and networks, completely regardless of my artistic connection to them. Because to me, that's what I rely on. I rely on the human concept. I am an artist, and I commission artists all the time, and that's great, but it's not the core of my work. It's the networks and the communities and the individuals. So my real concern is about their sustainability, and I certainly don't want to, and I haven't, start doing online activities which actually dilute my practice to such an extent that I consider I would be taking people down a dead end, because I wouldn't be able to see the outcomes that I would expect from real life physiological interaction. So I just decide not to do it. But what that does for me is it allows my relationship with those groups to remain strong without us having to sort of do it because we feel we must. I don't feel an imperative to take work which isn't the work that I specialize in. So the medium for me is not suitable. It really isn't. You can see, I can look at as many videos of people doing little things by themselves, but I can see nothing really that, shall we say, describes my relationship and to the arts practice and to the people that we work with. So for me, it's far easier to just say, no, I'm just not seeing the validity for me. And I'm not saying other people shouldn't, but there is a difference between someone who is producing art with an outcome which is non-arts based, and someone who's producing art because they feel art needs to be made, or the artist need to work. I'm not in the latter category. And that's just my position. So I'm not suggesting it's a better position, but that's how I define what I do. So I just worry that we might be doing lots and lots of stuff because we can, but maybe losing the focus on our outcomes and the frameworks and the funding which was in place to achieve certain things. So it's not none of this is meant, if it sounds as a criticism, I'm just saying for me, this digital medium has very little value. So that's that.
Could I add something, that there are some artists that I'm aware of who, and they are driven to make their work for the artistic outcomes as opposed to for another purpose, like you know, and they have decided they are not going online because their work doesn't deliver effectively online. And I think, while I think there's a real danger of people just putting any old thing online and not considering what it's going to look like. There's a reputational damage, and the other thing is that there's a lot of people that are digitally excluded, which I would almost count myself because my internet's so bad, but also from a socio-economic point of view. And people seem to think that online work is accessible. It's not accessible to everybody, and also it has an environmental impact, which a lot of people are saying, oh, we're not traveling, but the whole I don't know the technicalities, but the sort of server things, they do have carbon emissions. I think I got that right. So there's a lot of urban myths, shall we say, springing up and becoming consolidated. And I think it's important that we remember that it's not, well, it's not good anyway, but online has a lot of other issues beyond whether people actually choose to engage with it.
Andrew.
Yeah, so I think Zoom also has a creative element to it, which some people are using, and I've found it really great for that. There are a lot of meetings, and you can find yourself being a bit overwhelmed with that, but creatively it's interesting. I don't know if it's interesting for the general public, or if it's sharing it between artists in a creative way to make work, or yeah. So I've been, right from the very beginning, I've been going to, somebody's been like a dance artist has been doing something. We do 3 minutes of dance, 3 minutes of writing, and then we share and we play around, and it's been going for 14 weeks or something, and it's really great. And it's, especially on a bad day, it can really sort of lift you. I mean, there's less of it now. Tonight, I'm going to something, it's through the tramway. It's a sound, Mamoru Iragichi is doing it. It's a sound piece. So we had to make a recording and send it in. And then tonight at, I think it's like 11:30, we're all going to listen to this sound piece that he's making, and we're all going to sit in the dark. So I think, and Serge also doing the Serge Cabaret and doing the sort of live outdoor sort of Serge City Festival thing. So all these things are a way of using Zoom creatively. It doesn't just have to be about the meetings. And also I found that Zoom, in terms of having meetings with people in different countries, you know, across the country, has been really great. So I think that we shouldn't dismiss it as a tool, as a creative tool, but it's just that, it's another creative tool that we can play with. So I don't know if I've answered that question, but I'm just saying that I like Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously been doing the Serge Cabarets every weekend as part of Serge Festival, and then also created a full-length show with SYT, which was devised on Zoom and performed on Zoom. And at no point did we think, oh, this is much better than live theatre. Of course not. However, it was essential actually to kind of keep, particularly the SYT group, to keep that momentum going in our creativity and still be able to present something live. And so although it had limitations, we approached Zoom like a site-specific piece and found all the different things you can, you know, play with green screens and cameras on and off, and all the ways to create atmosphere. And would I do it again in a hurry? Perhaps not, but I'm really pleased it happened, because it was a really good stopgap and a good way to keep the creativity going in a group that would have just kind of maybe not seen each other again, and that would have felt really disheartening, particularly with a group of that age, a group of young makers who are just starting out. So yeah, I hear that there is a lot of difficulties, and Zoom is, yeah, it definitely, I definitely have experienced a lot of Zoom fatigue. But I am also really grateful for the opportunity to still present live work.
And I think that yeah, shows a sort of balance, nuance. And I think, Angie, you're absolutely right. It's a medium, and we need not to get lost in the novelty of it. But clearly there are, it has leveled some playing fields, just as it has excluded a different group. And one of the things that, I suppose, Jackie, you mentioned right at the beginning, and Noel, you've mentioned, is there's a whole element of, at a simple level, of assembly that goes with a lot of performance. And to some extent that, sort of, there is a conviviality, there's a sort of humanity, there's a social function in coming together, which I certainly don't feel, kind of however the Zoom event is set up. And especially for members of the public, and it's been interesting. I suppose, so hospitals will have the same bit of, at what point do people become in greater danger, in greater kind of health dangers, because they are isolated, than they would be by putting them at risk of coming together. And for the project that we're doing at the moment in school, we've had to make that argument almost pupil by pupil, of saying, we think that this pupil's situation at home means that actually the risks are outweighed by the benefits of them coming to do activities with us over the summer holidays. And, so I suppose one of the joys of street theatre or outdoor work is that we're really good at dynamic risk assessments, and we're really good at working out a whole bunch of new and, sort of new situations and how to find the right way of doing things. But again, I suppose it is that thing of, for us never to go back into hospital actually is going to have impacts on the mental health and the physical health of those patients. For us not to go and work with the community groups that Noel works with, for us, for us not to work with the disadvantaged teenagers up here, has an absolute disbenefit. And I think, yeah, maybe we somehow need to be quite overt about putting that risk down and saying, yeah, of course you're at risk coming to this. Of course you're at a greater risk coming to this live event than you would be staying at home. But you sort of need to make the choices. And just as millions of people made the choice to get on a packed aeroplane and bugger off to Spain as soon as they were allowed, and that to me feels like a far greater risk than standing in a field watching a piece of art. So how do we encourage this sort of positive rebalancing of risk? How do we lead both artists and audience safely into saying, we're not guaranteeing it's completely safe, we can't. But what we can do is we can be very forthright about the risks and encourage you to think about them yourselves, and to think about, yeah, so there's that wonderful old joke of the man who goes into the doctor's surgery and says, so doctor, if I give up whiskey and cigarettes and just eat broccoli for the rest of my life, will I live to be 100? And the doctor looks at him and says, I don't know, but it will certainly feel like it. And there's that bit of, we can be safe and stay at home and just do the stuff through Zoom, but actually, really? There's going to be a point where people are just going to go, you know what, sod it. I'm prepared to take that risk because I just need to be surrounded by other people. So yeah, how do we lead that process of rethinking the risks and benefits of what we do? Anyone?
I think it's interesting that if you go into a pub now, I mean, I was very, very risk averse when this all happened. I came back from Sri Lanka and I was self-quarantined and didn't see anybody for quite a long time. And I recently went to a pub And it was quite an unnerving experience. But the answer to your question is that those mitigating risk is being done all the time, and people are aware that, you know, if you go into the pub and the people there are wearing visors and you're given the gel and all the rest of it, it's really giving confidence that you are managing risk, and that and this is what the risk is, you know, and people know that it is clearly better to be outside than inside, and therefore if you're going to go into a pub, you're definitely taking a risk that you wouldn't be taking if you're sitting on a terrace outside. So I think it's as much of, it's about communication, which the Westminster government has failed so abysmally with. And we are communicators. Our job is to, as artists, is to communicate. So we should be very, very good at it. And it's to employ that skill in communication to say, well, this is what we're set up for you. We're creating an experience for you. And sure, it's a risk, but we're managing that risk. And this is what your experience is going to be like. And it's like when, you know, immersive theatre has started to happen, it was explained to people what was going to happen to them enough so that they had an idea, even though there was lots of surprises when they went in the theatre. And I think it's more, it's thinking about that, I guess.
Can I just say that oh, sorry, someone else is speaking.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say that for me, like we're talking quite a lot about how do we get audience and performers back together again. And for me, I'm thinking, what's missing in a Zoom call is that when you feel that you've got something to say, or you get excited by something that someone else has said, and then you have to reach for the mute button, or you have to wait. And that excitement that you felt, which needed to be let out and then responded to, the magic is gone. And you have to hold on to the thought in a very unnatural way. And that's great for a meeting if it's only discussing policy. But when it comes to interacting with other people for the excitement that comes from human interaction, your responses can't be stifled. So for me, if I was to design an event just now, I would be asking myself, how can I retain that spark for the responders? Less about how many numbers can we get there, and more about how can we practically allow everyone to have that capacity to respond and be responded to. And that, of course, can happen in many ways, but it seems to be, for me, a more realistic ambition. So whatever I do with people, whether it's got Zoom or whether it's got an outdoor sharing or an online thing, can I facilitate that? Because without that, I wonder that the sterility that comes from not being able to respond can completely dampen many other feelings that you have. That's just a comment there about interaction, I guess.
Martin?
Oh, sorry, Jackie was going to say first, and then Angie. Yeah.
I was going to say what you were saying about the fact that we do need artists, and what you've just said, Noel, about having the authentic, real, visceral experience is very important, because we can't continue like this, even though this can be hugely creative. But I mean, to get these things back into public spaces, it's just working with the commissioners to risk assess it. Because I mean, I've seen some great things online where you've had musicians and people playing outside windows and in amphitheatres, natural amphitheatre spaces in parks where you've had musicians, and it's been so beautiful just to see this happening. And so this is what keeps the spirit alive in these times. But also this thing about spreading the work, which Neil talked about. We've had to completely rewrite a project for Clyde Bank. We had some money, just about getting money from Creative Scotland, and they said, oh, you can't deliver that now. So now we've had to think of different ways of people interacting in their gardens and things like that. So, you know, I think artists have a huge role to play now to move about and spread themselves so that people do have this authentic experience in new ways. And I really do want to see things happening outside at the hospital and to risk assess it to the point, I mean, I know the hospitals will not want to put something on and then find out that people have become unwell if audiences have gathered unsafely. That's what they're really worried about. So I've just been thinking about buskers or singular artists who can do things, and people don't gather. They really don't want people gathering at the moment. That's the big thing.
And it's fascinating. We are trying to plan an outdoor show at the moment, and we have deliberately spread our net quite wide in the hope that it will be possible anywhere. And it's been interesting that Live Life Aberdeenshire, which is sort of cultural services up here, have just gone, we're not doing anything. We're not, no. And, you know, so they're absolutely kind of completely against it. Primary schools have been positive, but then weirdly, licensing officers have said that even though a primary school class doesn't have to socially distance in the class, if they came to watch a performance, even if it was on school grounds during school days, because they would then be an audience, they should socially distance. So suddenly you can't have a whole primary school in the playground where they'd be 10 minutes before you started the performance. They couldn't be there to watch a performance. And then the most enthusiastic of all the places that we've gone to have been care homes, who have been crying out for us to do it, and they've been asking us to come now, and we can't even rehearse it yet. But it's interesting that some of the care homes that have had catastrophic kind of deaths in their care homes, they're very aware that they have got residents who are getting no stimulus, whose families are terrified of visiting them, and some of the families are refusing for health reasons, etc. So they've got these lonely, isolated folk who desperately need stimulation. And the care homes, I suppose, because they're involved in the nitty-gritty of keeping people safe, know that actually you can keep people safe and away from a handful of performers in a car park. And so, yeah, we've got this sort of weird thing of, as it were, the most dangerous context that we could possibly go into in terms of who might die if they actually got infected, are the most enthusiastic. Whereas doing it in a big park in Peterhead for an adult audience, not a chance in hell. It's fascinating, and I think we're all going to, I think we're all going to face these and possibly be led by them. Karen, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add to what you just said. I think one of the issues around, so I'm in Brighton, and what you see is like, the beach absolutely heaving. And there's just, there's a kind of, there's a sort of divide between those who are really careful, who I would say that includes me, but then I still managed to get a cough, which is, who knows, maybe COVID. And then loads of people who just have a totally different view about what social distancing means and stuff, and then you have the sheer practicalities, which is people have to go to the loos, and the queues and stuff outside the toilets on the seafront is just insane, and they put in 3 extras, 3 loos for like millions of people, so I think that that's going to be a huge thing, and I think that that's one of the issues about doing something in a park like that, that difference of people.
Could I speak, Martin?
Yes, sorry, I can't.
I suppose the one thing that worries me as well is about responsibility, that the artists, performers, that people organising stuff are going to, all the owners on the responsibility of keeping everyone safe is going to be on us. And it's if we're doing it outside, surely that should be a shared responsibility. And it feels a bit scary that it's going to be totally your job. It's like, well, we're all sharing going outside. We all do that every day, or a lot of us do it every day, and we know how to act.
Here he is, he's back.
Apologies.
You're not the only person disappeared, Martin.
Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry, where were we?
I was just talking about responsibility, and that all that onus shouldn't just be on the performers, the artists, the organisers. It's like it's a general thing. Everyone needs to be taking that responsibility. And I suppose, in a way, saying that, I'm sort of not pointing the finger, but sort of saying that to people who might be putting your work on, or not expecting you to like just do everything. Because it should be a shared responsibility.
I think it should be a shared responsibility, and I think, again, in the context of building back better, sharing responsibility seems to be part of a process of democratizing the whole system. That it's not about the director or the producer being the boss and setting down what happens, and everyone else going, well, it's their problem, they kind of started it. I think we do have to create structures where there's much more equality, and that equality does mean a real negotiation about what people feel is appropriate. And we've started that for the projects that we're doing here, that absolutely I didn't feel as director that it was, that I didn't feel that I necessarily could guarantee everyone's safety even if they did buy into my system, but it didn't feel like I could do more than suggest possibilities. And actually it has to be a collective agreement to buy into that. Partly, so because everyone has to be comfortable with it, but also actually everybody has to be comfortable with everybody else's actions within that structure. And we were just having a conversation this morning about what do you do, so for instance, pubs in Aberdeen being a nightmare, but could you as a member, as an employer suggest to someone, I don't want you to go to the pub even though legally you're allowed to? But so there are going to be situations where that would feel like the only sensible way to protect a project. And another Moniac, they were doing Stones in Their Pockets, and the two actors, the younger actor just went to live with the other actor and his family for the whole kind of rehearsal and production process, because that was the way they could make it safe. And so clearly we're going to need to be creative about it, but I think we're also going to have to be really good at finding genuine kind of collective group agreements to working methods and out of work commitments. So I suppose, again, if you were going to be doing a close physical rehearsal with a group of actors, you'd want to know what they were doing at the weekend, because otherwise they're putting you at risk, and vice versa. And which gets into a terrifying kind of 1984 situation where you're sort of where you're judging people on their private lives. But we do somehow need to level out have those discussions and work out collectively what people are comfortable with, I think.
I think it's really, because we're sort of moving towards the end of this, I think it's really valuable to share experience. And, if you're the kind of work that each of you is making, as it happens, it is all quite different. And I think that what would be immensely helpful is if people were to say, well, I am making this show and it does involve a community, and this is how I've done it, and these are the mistakes I'm making, but these are the solutions that we've come across. And I think that it is such a fluid situation that the one thing that we can help each other is we can inspire each other by showing the way that we are going about doing it. And I think it'd be great if there's if we could coming out of this, that we could sort of keep these dialogues going, but make them very, very specific. It is about making work. There's one thing that we all want to do. We want to make work in our own practice, and because we're on a very fast learning cycle at the moment, the more we can share, then the more we can move forward quickly, and we can start developing policies, and we can start maybe talking to the government and talking and encouraging those who fund the arts to start thinking about how they're going to support us in the future. because I'm not sure those conversations are taking place at the moment.
Although, yeah, it's you could quite easily spend most of your week on a Zoom conference about this, between this and Articulation and Outdoor Arts UK and Emergency Exit Arts, and so yeah, it is fascinating how much conversation has been generated by this, and how much the sector, however you define that, has been brought together by the struggle of what the hell are we allowed to do and how do we do it. And I really hope that some of these bringing togethers sort of last once we actually start getting back to work properly, as it were. Yeah, no.
I see that in June, Nicola Sturgeon came out with a report, and it was a report from the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery for Scotland. And it came out abruptly, of course, in the light of COVID-19. And basically, they set out the framework for Scotland's recovery, which in a way, what they're going to spend the money on in the next year or two, and in the different way that they're going to spend it, because they're saying essentially, we cannot just try and deal with COVID-19 as the big emergency, because there's cyber attacks, there's so many things which are happening on a minute-to-minute basis, which could just as easily destabilize our economies the way that COVID-19 has done. So this report in June, I would recommend everybody reads it. It's called Towards a Robust and Resilient Wellbeing Strategy or Economy for Scotland. And it's about the shift from putting an emphasis on the numbers of people at events and how much money Scotland brings in from its industries and investment. And it's about, while still having the money to spend, but to spend it differently, so that when we are faced with more and more of these crises, the country has a better and more sustainable way of living. If you see, and I wouldn't have believed it myself had I not read that document in Nicola Sturgeon's words, saying we want to shift away from macroeconomic focus and spend the money on ways which actually give ourselves a better population so that we can cope, because we're going to be facing huge unemployment and huge destabilization in established structures. And that seems to be a fact. So they say, but the interesting thing is there's a big emphasis on well-being and the value of culture, and as a way of actually giving people that bit more in their everyday lives, and it's not a big focus on money. So it's just to say, if you haven't read it or seen it, I think it came out on the 20th of June, and it's spelling out the way forward for, so I think the conversation is starting. You see me? So it'll be followed up later in the year, but it looks to me like a good beginning for where government is looking for advice.
Give us a title again, Noel. I think catch it.
Neil, I've put it in the chat, I think. Towards Robust, Resilient Wellbeing Economy Scotland Report.
Brilliant.
But it's in chat.
Thank you both.
Okay, that's all I wanted. I just think it could be a good starting point for figuring out where we go with whatever is gleaned from these discussions. You see me, like
yeah,
absolutely. Actually, sorry, Neil, go ahead.
No, I just want to be really explicit about what I just said, because it's just simply this: is that I'm working with an artist called Luke Jerram, and he's come up with a series of projects completely as a response to COVID, and they're quite inspirational. And I'd like him just to write about his process and say, and this is my work, and this is how I've done it, because I think other people working in his part of the sector will find inspiration. And so I'm hoping to publish it about the world. And what I'm going to do after this, I think, if you think it's a good idea, is invite those people who have live projects that they are on it, that there's a succinct way of describing their project and how they're making it work, so that people have points of reference to really practical ways of moving forward.
I think that's excellent. Yeah.
I'm going to have to dip out actually, because I'm ready for the next one. But
yeah, I was going to say, I think we all probably have to dip out ready for the next one. Has anybody got any burning issues that haven't been addressed, or they just want to conclude with? Excellent. We've covered everything. But what has been lovely about this, and for which is kind of, yeah, we should all thank ourselves and congratulate ourselves, is that so often these can get bogged down in almost kind of the complaints and the struggles and the obstacles and the red tape. And it's been really interesting listening to people hold on to the strengths of their work, but also, I suppose, kind of celebrate some of the new possibilities and, you know, so the way that festivals can get spread, or the way that big events can get spread into lots of different events, and the way that, you know, I suppose Mel and Jackie in particular have kind of really reminded us about some of the people that we work with or perform to or engage with. And I think it's been really recharging in that I've come out of this feeling, yeah, much more excited about doing work and much more excited about playing with structures and possibilities. And I think that's really what this whole sort of process has to be about, is finding new excitements and remembering why we did it, not just the what we used to do, but the why we did it. So yes, I've really enjoyed it. If no one else has got anything pressing, I suggest we end here in case anyone's going to the second one. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was really good of you.
Yes,
Great.
Great show.
Well, thanks so much for coming. Okay, lovely. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.